Welcome back. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and today is the very first Ask Me Anything for the channel. Now, when I started this whole thing 4 years ago, I literally had no idea what I was doing. But somehow people found the channel, somehow they started watching, and even more remarkably, they came back time and time again. So I thought a Q&A would be a great way to celebrate the 4th anniversary of Relative Time, as well as a way to reconnect with old viewers and connect with new subscribers who may not be familiar with who I am and why I'm doing this. But more importantly, it's a way for me to thank everyone who's been watching and tuning in, because I literally could not have done this without all of you. Now, before we jump into this one, and this one may be a long one, I have one quick channel announcement, as well as one more reason to celebrate. As of a few days ago, the channel hit 30,000 subscribers. And some of you may have remembered that I mentioned a 30,000 subscriber giveaway. Well, I'm still planning to do that, but because everyone's usually so busy during the holidays, I've decided to wait and kick that off in early January. So just keep an eye out for that video, and I'll announce how you enter. Alright, so let's get to it, and for the most part, these are fairly randomized. But if I saw a question that kind of connected to another one, I just grouped them together. So the most common question asked was some form of who are you? How old are you? What's your background? And why are you doing this? So to start that question off, I'm in my early 40s. I was born in the late 70s, kind of in that little slice of era where we all grew up in a very analog childhood, but the world started becoming digital as we entered college. As for my background, and this is something I have mentioned in a few other videos, it's as a scientist. And specifically, I'm a chemist, and more specifically, an analytical chemist. And if you don't know what that means, that's quite all right. Most people don't. Basically, analytical chemistry is sort of the practical side of P-Chem, which is kind of the physics side of chemistry. We're the ones who study how to make instruments and then use those instruments to figure out what's in samples. So if someone has a sample of something and they want to know how much of something is in it or what's in it, then they hand it to us and we have some techniques and equipment we can use to figure this out. Now, if anyone's watched any sort of crime drama in the last 20 years, like say CSI or NCIS, I can guarantee you've seen some equipment and heard some of the techniques that I know how to do. It's kind of all falls into that little category. Although for me, I've never done anything on the criminology side of things. My background is in drug research. I've worked with some very small startups, some big startups, and even big pharma. And for those of you who have commented that I remind you of some college professor, that's probably why. I learned to do presentations just kind of in that academic sphere, as well as just giving presentations at conferences to other scientists. For number 2, we have a follow-up question to that from Kristen Yegg, and that's what made you decide to start a YouTube channel. Well, about 4.5, maybe 5 years ago, I started getting into watch collecting, and like a lot of you, I did that by watching YouTube. I thought it was a great way to learn about the various watches out there, and a lot better than just looking at still images. Now, my collection wasn't very big, and about 4 years ago on Black Friday, I was just perusing Timex's site, and I happened upon a particular watch that I thought was interesting. I tried doing a bit of research on it, but I couldn't find anything on it, at least not on YouTube. The only thing I could find was on a website called Slick Deals, which is actually a website I go to very frequently and just talks about various deals on the internet. Now, on Slick Deals, which I know is kind of a weird name, the only thing somebody mentioned was that it was probably a beige version of a more famous Timex. A lot of people don't know about this one, but it was kind of a cult hit in Japan, and it was this collaboration between Timex and Red Wing boots, where the watch was a straight Timex Waterbury, but the strap was made like Red Wing boots are made. So I bought it, and it turned out to be exactly that. And since there really wasn't any information out there other than just Slick Deals, I thought I should make a video just to tell people about it, as one of the biggest and coolest aspects of watch collecting is just the community. Now, at the time, one of the things that bothered me with some YouTube reviews was when you really couldn't get a good look at the watch, where it was just kind of floating hands holding it and the watch was going in and out of focus. Another thing was when there was a bad mic used and you could barely understand what the person was saying. So when I started doing these, I really wanted to commit to doing good audio and good video, and I realized I was going to have to learn a lot in order to do that. And I like to think I have learned a lot in that period of time, but I'm still learning and trying to improve every day. Anyway, let's move on to number 3, and that is, what is your favorite watch that you never wear? And this is from JB. One of the problems of being a reviewer is that we're always wearing new watches to test out rather than our old favorites. And maybe that is a good problem to have. But because of that, there are a number of watches that I haven't worn in months, even though they're watches I really love. It's hard to narrow it down just to one watch, but there are two that come to mind. The first is the Zealous Nova, which is a fantastic watch I don't wear near enough. And the other, and this may surprise some of you, is the Phoebus Great Wall. And some of that may be just because I test out a lot of divers. So the days that I'm not testing something out, I usually pick a non-diver. And that is a pity because I love this watch, but I don't think I've worn it for at least a couple of months. So moving on to number 4. What adds the most value to a watch for you? In other words, would it be the dial, movements, case, finishing, etc.? Well, ideally, every aspect of the watch should be in balance with each other, as well as be in balance for what they're trying to sell it for. But for me personally, I'd say more a combination of the finishing and design. And these days, I'd say I'm more attracted to unique and very interesting designs. And some of that may be just because I've seen too many watches at this point that I'm always looking for something different. Question number 5. What's your favorite mechanical chrono below $4,000? Honestly, I'm probably not the best person to ask about this. My focus here is more on affordable watches, so I don't really pay attention to stuff in that price range. However, I will say that my favorite non-quartz, and this is one that I've bought, is my Panda Hamilton Intramatic, which I just happen to be wearing right now. Now, there are a few other chronographs I'm interested in, like, say, a Speedmaster, as well as I've always had an obsession with the Tag Monacos. But for me, especially right now, this is pretty much the perfect chronograph. Number 6. This is not a question, but can you please include more of your Husky in your videos? Now, funny, I'm actually reading that right now because Aurora is right down here and she's kind of huffing and occasionally shaking her collar. And I'm not sure if the microphone's picking that up or not. If I can, and when I can, I try to include them. Actually, I have 2, but sometimes it's not always easy. One of my favorite videos, I did throw Aurora in there as kind of an executive producer. But the thing is, at this point, she's a little over 10 and she's kind of becoming a grumpy old lady. And most of the time, she just wants to lay around and she only kind of moves when she's hungry. And since she is a husky, she's also fairly stubborn, so she doesn't necessarily move unless I got food out. So I'd like to include her more, but it's kind of tricky figuring out how. Or at least in a way that works with the video. Now, my other dog, Odin, is about 3, and he's a German Shepherd Husky mix. And he's actually been in quite a few videos, and especially when I'm doing wrist shots out in the backyard, you'll occasionally see a blurry form kind of moving around, and that's him. Now, since he's a German Shepherd, he's always following me around, so he would be easier to get in the videos, but I gotta figure out kind of how to include him in something. Just because since he is a German Shepherd, he's usually running around like crazy. But short version, I'll try. Number 7. What are your top 3 American microbrand manufacturers? Well, the first 2 are pretty easy, and I'd say that's Ver and Notice. They're both based out in California. They both design the watches there. The parts are manufactured in China, but they both assemble the watches in the US. They're both great, and they both sit at different price tiers. As for the third, that's kind of tough. If I had to say something, maybe Aragon, maybe Bertucci, but I don't think those 2 quite qualify as microbrands. But they are American watch companies. Number 8, and I think this is actually from Mark at Long Island Watch. As a content creator, do you feel compelled to cover watches that will give you a higher view count? Well, short answer is yes, but it's more complicated than that. I think anyone who has a YouTube channel wants their channel to succeed, and succeeding isn't necessarily about pure views, but about growing. And growing is directly related to views, but it's more about getting new people in who haven't necessarily seen the channel in to view it and potentially subscribe. There are really 2 ways that this happens, and they're both kind of tied to the almighty mysterious YouTube algorithm. The first is more of a long-term growth strategy, and that's making videos and trying to get them to rank higher on search rankings. So that way, if somebody's searching for a particular watch, they'll find your video and watch it before, say, someone else's. To do this, you primarily need to make a good video and hope that it gets ranked and hope that it stays up there as time goes by. There are ways to optimize this, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. See, if you pick a really popular watch, more people are looking for it, there are more chances they're going to find you, but there's also more competition. Whereas if you pick a less popular watch, not as many people are looking for it, but you have less competition. With that, I think you are better off picking a more popular watch, but not necessarily by much, because it is more long term growth. And that's not really the growth that people are obsessing over. The other way is when the algorithm decides to take your video and really start promoting it to people who've never heard of you. And this is the thing people obsess over, this is the dragon they're chasing, and this is the thing that just drives everyone bonkers when it doesn't happen. Because the whole trick with all of this is that you never really know what the YouTube algorithm is gonna do. You can kind of increase your odds of it picking you up by picking a more popular watch, but it's never guaranteed. I mean, there have been a few times where I'm absolutely certain when making a video that the algorithm is going to pick it up, only to find that it doesn't. More recently, a great example of this is the Seiko Monster Antarctica watch I reviewed. I mean, it's a Seiko, it's a special edition, it's brand new. I mean, why wouldn't the algorithm pick it up and spread it to everyone? And especially because at the time, no one really had any macro shots like I do of it, so I thought it was kind of a shoo-in. Now, the video did well compared to what I normally do, but the algorithm really didn't take it and spread it beyond the regular audience. And another video that I thought this would happen with was the Casio Royale review I did not that long ago either. I mean, with such a popular watch, it seems likely that people are going to be interested in it. And once again, it did okay, but didn't really spread beyond the channel. However, more recently, the Casio Oceanus T200 video got picked up by the algorithm, and it went crazy, at least compared to what normally happens. I think when I checked the analytics not too long ago, it was telling me that it did about 8.5 or 9 times better than my videos regularly do. Or another example was the Timex Pace strap review I recently did. Traditionally, strap reviews don't do that well, but this one really took off, and within a week, it's got almost 15,000 views. And for my channel and for a strap review, that's just amazing. So if there's really one thing that I've learned over the last 4 years of YouTube, is that there really are no guarantees and no way to predict what's going to happen. There are things you can do to try to increase the odds, like pick a really popular watch, but even then, it's not a certainty. And for me, I think the only way to maintain sanity in the long run is to just stop obsessing over this kind of thing and really just focus in on things that interest you. Now, if what you're interested in also happens to be a popular watch, all the better. But you can't really just focus on that. Rather, you just need to focus on making good content. Because if you don't and you're just kind of chasing that dragon, you're going to burn out and burn out pretty quick. So for long-term sustainability, it's really all about finding a good balance. So number 9, we have a follow-up question. How do you balance the competing interests of creative autonomy, authenticity with view counts and sponsorships? Once again, I think balance is vital, but let me specifically talk about microbrands and sponsored videos. Uh, these days, when I get an email from a microbrand requesting a review, they usually tell me who they are, maybe a little background on the brand, as well as the watch that they're interested in sending over to me. Usually I respond by telling them my initial thoughts and then just kind of asking for a timeline that they're looking for. Is it a Kickstarter watch that there's a specific time frame a review needs to be done by? Or is it something they're selling directly and there isn't a strict timeline? Once they respond, I kind of figure out if I can do it. And if it's a watch I'm interested in, I usually tell them yeah and give them my address. And that's pretty much it. The watch just usually shows up. So no contracts, no negotiations, no nothing. Now, everyone does things their own way when they're reviewing watches, but this is kind of how I do it. And for me, the key thing is to really keep it casual and keep it really friendly. In fact, if a brand owner starts getting very formal or very business-like and maybe talking about requirements, I'm less likely to actually do anything with them. And honestly, one of my biggest pet peeves is when I get cold emails from random brand owners and they keep going on and on about collaboration. Because when I see that, I always think in my head, there's no collaboration here. Your involvement ends at the post office. That's it. Which, now that I'm saying it, does sound kind of cold and dickish, but I think that is really the best way to think about it. And this may sound a little weird, but I think by keeping things very friendly, it also maintains a proper power balance, where neither party really feels that the other owes them anything. Or if there is an imbalance, it's one that's more in my favor, where they're asking me to do a review rather than the other way around. Which is also why I don't do paid reviews and why getting to keep something is never required. In fact, these days my general policy is with, getting to keep a watch is that unless they bring it up, I never even mention it. Which is something I do because I think it makes it fairer for the smaller micros who can't really afford to do that like some of the larger ones. Otherwise, the only time I ever really bring it up is if I get a watch and there's some question about it, and then I'm doing it just for transparency's sake with you guys. So that's how I keep things in balance, and I think it's worked pretty well over the last 4 years. In that time, I've only ever really had two instances where brands really started getting demanding. And those ones, they were actually starting to push what, I should say in the video. They're trying to rush me with particular deadlines. And even one of the brands was telling me I needed approval before I published it, which I never do. And they were even trying to dictate and tell me what I needed to do for the thumbnail. Now, in both of those situations, I wound up writing a rather lengthy come to Jesus email, as some people say in the South, which has nothing to do with religion, but more about just, laying down how it is. By basically reinforcing what I'm doing, I'm not their employee, I'm not their advertiser, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and that's basically it. If they don't like it, then I'll send the watch back to them immediately, and that's that. And hopefully, this doesn't come off like an egotistical prick, but these kind of situations do get easier the larger the channel gets. Because right now, I'm turning down almost twice as many review requests as I'm accepting. So if someone's being really demanding, it's kind of like, hey man, I don't need your drama. I got plenty of other things to do. I'm just going to walk away. Anyway, moving on to number 10. What are your thoughts on Seiko's spring drive? Now, I've never actually seen a spring drive in person, but I desperately want to. I completely love the idea behind the Seiko spring drive and really want one, not just to see, but actually want to own one someday, whether it's in a Grand Seiko or maybe just one of the higher end Seikos. I think it's one of the most interesting and innovative movements around and combines some of the best aspects of mechanical and quartz. It's kind of hard to go wrong, and whoever designed it was a genius. So one of my long-term goals is to get one. The only thing that's kind of holding me back is price. Number 11, do you have a favorite lume? C1, C3, etc., etc., etc. Well, definitely not old radium. Old radium can look good in some watches, but it really lacks any real oomph. So my top two picks are probably C3 and BGW9. I think they last the longest. Technically, C3 I think is better, but it really depends on the application. If a brand really just throws on tons of layers, BGW9 can't beat it. So personally, for me, between those two, I actually like the blue BGW9 better. Number 12, and this is actually from Oleg over at 24 Hours at a Time. Are there any watches you've changed your opinion about? I.e., watches you used to dislike and now you like them, or the other ways around? Well, there aren't any specific watches that I've really changed my mind about. If there's something I dislike, it usually doesn't stick around long enough for me to kind of change my mind about it. But there are a few sort of categories I've really changed my mind about over the last 4 years. Like submariners or subbies in general is one of them. When I started the channel, I was kind of obsessed with really learning and getting some of the homages out there and maybe even getting a submariner. But the more I've gotten to see, at least the homages, the less interested I've been in it. I still think it's a great watch and maybe one of the best dive watches out there, but I just don't necessarily think they're for me. Another category would be smaller watches, less than 40 millimeters. When I first started, the Seiko SNK was one of the first automatics I had on the channel. I liked it, but I just thought it was too small. Whereas these days, I've actually been trying on more and more, under 40 millimeter watches and actually found myself really liking them just because they're more comfortable. And the last thing are cyclopses on watches. When I first started, I absolutely hated them, but these days I'm coming to appreciate the functionality of that. And maybe part of that is just getting older. All right, number 13. Which watch YouTubers do you think you could take in a fight? Well, kind of hard to say, especially because most of the time, all you see is like this with everybody, or sometimes all you see are like hands. So if I have to say someone, I'm going to say Dave just because he's all the way in Japan and I don't think he'd get upset if I said it. Whereas Alton's up in Canada and he could probably drive down here. Number 14. As someone who knows Orient Star well, where would you place them in terms of quality and value? I think it depends on which Orient Star you're looking at because there is a little bit of a range in quality. But generally, I'd say they're comparable to like mid to mid high end watches. I think a good safe bet would be to look at what price they're currently going for and maybe double that and compare that to watches in that price range. Like, say, my Orient Star, for example, the only real bad thing with it is the pressed clasp, but I'd put it up against a lot of $1,000 divers out there. There is one trick to Orient Star, and this is something a lot of people should be aware of, and that's in terms of getting them serviced. Now, fortunately, I haven't had to get mine serviced, but I have heard a variety of stories from people saying their local watchmakers won't touch them. And I've even heard some people say they wound up shipping theirs back to Japan and having Orient work on them directly there, which supposedly isn't bad in terms of price. It's just you got to pay extra to ship it there and maybe get it shipped back to you. So just something to be aware of. Number 15, would you review one of the top of the line Orient Stars, like the Moon Phase or Slim Date? I would absolutely love to review one, but the problem is that they are a bit pricey and they're kind of in that price range where I don't really feel comfortable buying one just to review and maybe risking losing a lot of money if I turn around and resell it. And currently, I don't have any sort of hookup to borrow one or get a discount on one. A lot of the Orient Stars I've looked at previously, I've gotten from Tusk Watches in the UK. And as far as I know, they're not looking at those really high-end Orients. So right now, it's probably not going to happen. But if I happen to find someone who will let me borrow one or maybe give me a discount, I'd probably jump on it. Number 16, and this is from longtime viewer Stavros. In these weird times where travel is difficult and knowing you love to travel, are watch reviews an alternative to keep a state of mind? Do you find any others, and would you exchange watches for a good trip, maybe at the cost of missing a timeline for your channel? Or is this getting to be some kind of drug? Well, it can be like a drug, and especially at first. But the key, and I think the key, like I've said before, for long-term sustainability is really balance, and especially balancing your personal life and your personal priorities with what's going on here with the channel. Because once again, if you don't, you're just going to risk burning out and burning out quickly. Now, for me personally, when it comes to trips and comes to family things, family has a priority. When someone requests a watch review and I know I have a trip coming out in that period of time, I really think about whether I can actually do it. And if it's any doubt that I can't, I just tell them that I can't, just so that I don't screw them over. And in the future, if I do miss a deadline, I of course apologize to the brand. But like I mentioned before, this is one of the other reasons I try to keep things very casual, very friendly, just kind of a friendly exchange. And if I can't happen to do it, they don't necessarily owe me and I don't necessarily owe them anything. Number 17, I always wanted to know why is the date indicator at the 12, mostly the 3 or the 6, but I've never seen a date window at the 9. That is actually a really excellent question. And I honestly have no idea, but if I had to guess, I'd guess that it has something to do with most people being right-handed and most people wearing a watch on their left, as just like kind of with the crowns on the left. I have seen a few pictures of watches where the date is at the 9, but they're really rare. Just like crowns being over on that side of the watch are really rare. If I had to guess, I think it's more like when you look down at the watch, you're kind of looking down at the right side of it if you're wearing it on your left. So maybe that's the most convenient place for it, or maybe what they thought was the most convenient place for it, and at this point it's just tradition. Number 18, what watch do you wear at home that viewers may be surprised is a favorite? Most of my favorite watches have made it on the channel, and I've talked about how they're my favorite watches. So I don't really think there's a surprise there, but some people may be surprised to know that a type of watch I wear is occasionally a fitness tracker. Although notice I'm wearing it on the right arm, not the left, and that's because I still want to wear a regular watch. So I'm dual wielding it, or Schwarzkopfing it, or Market Long Islanding it, whatever you want to call it. It kind of goes through phases. I've worn them in the past, kind of stopped, and now I've more recently started trying to wear one just because I need to get in better shape, or at least that's my goal for the next year. In the past, the one I've had is the Vivo Smart 4, and I like that one because it's really thin, and I don't really need these to tell time because I have the watch on my left hand, so I just want this thing on to keep track of what I'm doing. This one that I'm wearing right now, I just got. This is the brand new Amazon Halo. So far I like it, but I've only had it for like a week, so don't ask me too many questions about it. Number 19 is basically asking me, how do you start selling the watches you don't keep after reviewing it? Larry's started buying them on eBay, but he's never sold anything. That is actually a good question, and I'm not really sure I can really recommend anything right now. In the past, I've always focused on eBay just because I've always used eBay. I've used eBay since like the very beginning. But these days, I'm starting to get really annoyed with them because they're just getting way too greedy. Realize that they've actually raised the commission fee on when you sell a watch with them to about 15%. And that can add up really quickly. And I'm not sure I even want to deal with that anymore. So currently I'm trying to evaluate maybe some other ways to do it. There are some other websites like Chrono 24, but I've never tried them. And I know one of the other really good ways is just through social media, either through like Facebook groups or maybe like forums like Watch You Seek. The only trick with those is that you do need to have kind of a good reputation in the system so people trust you. Although for me, I actually have the advantage of having this channel and a website, and I might start using that to try to sell some of my used watches, which I know is something that Dave's been doing over on his website. And for those that don't know, I do have a website, and at this point, it's kind of a compendium for the YouTube channel, where for each video up, I usually have a page that shows off some additional pictures and maybe links to some of the straps. Right now, I'm not trying to sell anything there, but maybe next year I'll start putting some pictures up and just seeing if anybody's interested that way. Number 20, why aren't you the world's most expensive voiceover man? Well, that's a good question, and a question I ask frequently. Just kidding. I've never really tried. People have always told me I had a good voice throughout my entire life, but never really tried focusing on it. I have thought about trying to do something like audiobooks in the past, but haven't yet to really get into that. Maybe in the future. From what I have seen when it comes to making audiobooks, it's almost as time intensive as, say, running this YouTube channel. And when you first start out, you're making maybe even less than YouTube. So right now, I think my time's better served making more videos. But who knows? Maybe next year I'll give it a shot. Number 21. What's your favorite chess opening move? Well, I kind of hate to admit it, and I feel like maybe a little bit of a fraud, but I'm actually not that good at chess. I know how to play, but I don't really know the moves, and I'm not an expert in any way. I'm pretty much an amateur when it comes to chess. The thing is, and the reason I have them is that I actually collect chess sets, sort of. It's kind of this random thing that just happened when I was traveling. I think I was in Mexico for the first one and saw a chess set that I thought was really cool and bought it and brought it home. Then I think there was another time I was in Honduras and again saw a chess set that I thought was really cool, bought it and brought it home. So I don't have too many of them, but all the ones I have are ones that I've kind of picked up when traveling. Number 22, which watch brands do you absolutely dislike? There really isn't a brand that I absolutely hate, but there is one particular brand that just kind of rubs me the wrong way, and not necessarily for any particular reason. And some of you may be surprised to hear that it's Tissot. I've only ever really had one Tissot, and granted, it was a pretty weird one, so that's not really a good representation, but I just never really liked the brand, and the watches I've seen just never really appealed to me. At that same price point, I'm just more inclined to go look at Hamilton, which I do like. But to be truthful, I don't think I've ever really given them a chance, and maybe that's something I should try and change this next year. Number 23, thank you for your videos. What is your favorite big brand and micro brand? Well, big brand, I'd say, is a toss up between maybe Orient Star and Hamilton. I had to pick one, probably Orient Star. As for micro brands, I gotta say that's a tough one. Vario is definitely one of my favorites. I've looked at a lot of their watches and loved almost every one. Whereas, say, Second Hour Watches is also great. I have the Mandala, and I absolutely love that. Peter's designs are incredible, and nothing else looks like it. Then there's like the Swiss Watch Company, who always offer you a ton of value for what you're getting, as well as Phoebus, and I've liked some of the different stuff that Phoebus has been doing lately. And then there's Zelos, which is just awesome all the way around. So it's kind of hard for me to pick, but if I had to pick just one, I guess I'd say Vario. And I guess I'd say Vario just because I have, I think, every Vario model. I've bought most of them, and I don't plan on selling any of them. So I guess that may be the most telling thing. Number 24, what was the first watch you were ever sent gratis for review? Now, I've already talked about how I deal with microbrands and sponsored content, and because that's related, if you happen to miss it, make sure you go back and check that out. But when it comes to the very first watch I got to keep, I think that was a Guanshin Nomos homage that GearBest sent me. And if you don't know what GearBest is, I think they're still around. Or if they're not, back then they were another source for, kind of generic Chinese watches. They were kind of competitors with AliExpress. These days, AliExpress has kind of taken over that field just from the sheer variety. But at the time, GearBest was kind of contacting reviewers and just kind of asking them if they want to check anything out. So not necessarily the most glorious watch, but it was an interesting one. Now, if you're talking maybe bigger brands, I think the very first watch I got to keep from one of those was one from Spinnaker, and I think that was the Tessai Titanium. And some of you may not believe this, but at the time I was actually much more excited just from the fact that Spinnaker reached out to me than I was about getting to keep anything. Back then, I was kind of operating under this false assumption that I shouldn't even try to reach out or no brand would even do anything with me until I got much, much bigger. I think at the time I was like 3,000 subscribers, and I was thinking like I need to be 20 to 30,000 before I was even worth anyone's time. I drastically underestimated just kind of how small and how powerful our little community is. And if I'm being perfectly honest, back then I was actually a little jealous of some other channels, ones that were my size and a little bit smaller, who always seemed to be getting things sent to them from brands. I just kept thinking, why aren't these brands contacting me? Like, what am I doing wrong that no one's reaching out and asking me to look at stuff? And the thing is, and what I failed to realize here, was that the brands weren't reaching out to those channels were reaching out to the brands, and the brands were responding. At the time, I wasn't even trying to do anything like that. Like I said, I didn't think it would be worth anyone's time. So this is kind of part of my whole learning experience when it came to YouTube, was learning about how other channels are operating. And I probably could have even asked them, but I was just kind of working on my own assumptions about the way things worked. In retrospect, it wasn't necessarily that big a deal just because Spinnaker sends out watches to tons of people. But for a really small channel back then, I was just really excited about it because it was another milestone, kind of like, getting 10,000 subscribers just because a bigger brand recognized you around. As you can see, I had a lot of questions. I think it was almost 50, and I spent a lot of time answering them. So rather than have one really large unwieldy video, I've decided to split this into two parts. Now I'm currently working on editing that second part, and when it's done, there'll be a link, somewhere over there. Until then, keep an eye out, feel free to ask any questions down below, and thanks for watching.